Well, Nikki Mottram grew up in Toowoomba. She went to school here and then pursued a successful career in the area of child protection. But Nikki's always been a writer on the side. So when she finally sat down to write a full-length novel, she decided to base it in her local area, and also in terms of the subject matter as well, to stick to what she knew best, because that's always the advice for first-time writers, isn't it? Stick to what you know. So Nikki's debut novel, Crow's Nest, is inspired by an unsolved crime back in the 1990s, and of course written with the aid of Nikki's own background in the field of child protection. Crow's Nest is told from the perspective of Dana Gibson, an out-of-town social worker posted to Toowoomba and subsequently dragged into a murder investigation of two local women. It's received high praise indeed. Nikki joins me in the studio to talk a little bit more about the process and the book and what comes next. Nikki, good morning. Welcome. Lovely to have a chat to you.
Hi, David. It's lovely to be here.
And congratulations on the book. I mean, before we delve into the book itself, this is your debut novel, so that means since the 31st, you can walk into any bookstore and you'll see multiple copies of Crow's Nest along the shelves, or it might be on its own display stand with your name on the front cover. How long has this been a dream for you?
Oh, look, it's been a dream really for a long time, probably about 10 years. And it's been just surreal seeing this big idea I had in my head and that I've essentially been working on for 5 years. It's been really surreal just seeing it on the shelves and seeing the beautiful cover. So it's just been so exciting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have, as a first-time novelist, it's just more my curiosity coming into play, do you, because obviously the more successful you are, I would imagine the more muscle you can flex over things like cover design and that sort of thing. But as a debut novelist, do you still get a say in what the book looks like, or do you just have to say, yes ma'am, no ma'am?
Yeah, look, UQP were just amazing about accepting some of my ideas for the cover. And they incorporated a few of those, and they had a designer, obviously, and she just did a beautiful job of, really depicting what the book was about with the hills hoist and the kind of menacing crows. So, I couldn't have imagined it being more beautiful. She did a wonderful job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. Your pathway to this book is an interesting one in that you've had a long career in the field of child protection, and you've used that field of work as the foundation for the story you tell in Crow's Nest. But I'm curious as to what came first for you. Was it a desire to be a writer or a novelist, or was it a desire to work in child protection and then the writing came later?
Oh, look, that's a tricky one. I think,
Or they sort of melded?
They did meld a little bit.
Yeah. I
always loved books growing up. I was raised on a diet of the Agatha Christie's and Dick Francis and Enid Blyton. So I really loved, books growing up. And then at university, I got heavily involved in psychology, and that was another passion of mine. So I guess, working for child protection made sense. But at the same time, I'd always had that big dream of writing a book. So I chipped away at it for years and was in a writing group, and I've just, I guess, continued to do both things. I've worked part-time because I've had young children, and in my spare time I've been writing this book. So far I've been able to do both of them. Yes.
And really, as a source of ripping good yarn, then you can't get much better than some of the cases you would have worked on or heard about in your day job.
Yeah, I mean, that's so true. So many times I've been sitting at the computer at my day job, and it's just occurred to me that some of the cases you read about with these families are as complex and interesting as anything I've ever read in a crime novel. So just being able to use that as a basis was wonderful, and use the kind of sorts of things I was seeing as a child protection officer and weave that into the book, I think was a really great basis for the book.
Absolutely. And they always say, whether it's something as complex as child protection or whatever, first writers write about what you know.
They do, yes.
Don't try and branch into something that involves too much research.
That's so true. And I had a baby and a toddler when I set out to write this book, so yes, I made a concerted effort to do, I guess, as little research as possible and really stick to the things I know, like child protection and a familiar setting such as Toowoomba and Crow's Nest.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So tell me, an elevator pitch, if you like, for the book. If you were selling it or describing it to someone first time, you didn't have long. How do you sum it up?
Dana Gibson is a child protection worker who's travelled from Sydney to Queensland after a dramatic fight with her husband, and on her first day at work she's sent out to the nearby town of Crow's Nest, where she works with a mother and her best friend. And shortly afterwards, the mother and her best friend are found murdered in thick bushland. So Dana becomes obsessed with the case and begins her own investigation into who murdered the two women.
So she becomes almost like detective.
She does, yes.
Well.
I guess she fills that kind of traditional police procedural role.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You say that there are links to an unsolved crime from 1991 that was committed somewhere in regional Queensland.
Mm-hmm.
What are the links there? Tell me.
Look, I guess the central mystery that Dana and Angus are trying to solve is kind of loosely inspired by a case that happened in 1991 in regional Queensland. It was just a case I remember seeing as a child in the Courier Mail and kind of seeing, a car with the doors flung open, and that kind of haunted me, I guess, and stayed with me. And as an adult, it was in the media again because it was unsolved, and they were kind of up to their third inquiry into the deaths of these two women. And I guess I was just really saddened and scandalised that it was one of those sad cases that because the investigation wasn't done particularly well at the beginning, there was just never any justice for those two women. So I guess that's something that kind of played on my mind when I was writing this book.
You grew up in Toowoomba,
Yes.
so you'd be familiar with, I always think one of the interesting things about southern Queensland is that there are so many small towns, larger towns, but
Yes.
also small towns that you only really discover if you need to go there for some reason.
Yes.
So what made you hone in on Crow's Nest in particular? What was it about that town?
Really, it could have been set anywhere. Crime and child protection issues happen across the board and across demographics. One of the things really was just Crow's Nest has such an atmospheric and evocative name, and just thought it'd be an amazing name for a
Not so much
crime
the
novel,
town, but
really.
the name.
Yes, the
Yes.
name. It's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. I always also think, though, with the town itself, it's just the fact that the CBD is all around this square.
Yes.
It's quite unusual. It's not the main street goes through it,
that's
but
true.
The fact that all the shops are around this square makes it very sort of homely. I think. It's got a real
lovely
sort of
place.
attraction. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Have you had any feedback from the people of Crow's Nest themselves about
I
how
have
come
had-
you've written
yeah,
a
look,
murder story about our town?
I have had the odd kind of comment that I've seen online, and it seems to be positive so far,
That's good.
which is lovely.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
everyone knows it's not a true story.
That's right.
So,
It's definitely a fictional story, and you read about a lot of kind of serial killers in New York, and everyone's very clear that it's just kind of a trope, and it's
That's
definitely
right.
there's a lot of other wonderful things about New York.
Absolutely.
So, yes.
It's got to be set somewhere.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's face it.
Yes.
How difficult is it for a first-time writer to get their first novel published? A lot of people are self-publishing these days.
Yeah.
You've got a fairly big name publisher. How rocky is that road to get to that stage?
Look, I think you need a lot of patience really to be an author. I started out writing in about my late 20s, and I kind of dipped my toe in the water by doing short story courses first, and I did some courses through the Queensland Writers Centre, and eventually built up to writing a full-time novel. So I think you just have to be willing to put in the hours and try and get as good at your craft as you possibly can. But I think, it is quite competitive. A lot of people write. And I always think there's a bit of luck involved, really, in it. My big break came when I did a literary speed dating course through the Australian Society of Authors, and that's kind of where I met my agent, and I pitched the book to him, and Sydney just happened to be in lockdown at that time, so he was able to read the manuscript really quickly, which never happens.
Right, okay.
Then I was incredibly excited when UQP picked up the book. So yes,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And what about that process then, though? Because I've spoken to a few writers. There are many pluses, obviously, to having a big publisher, but there are also potential downsides in that I presume this was the case, they give you an editor who then takes your work that you thought was brilliant, because obviously, hey, they picked up on it, so they must love every last word, and suddenly it's sort of slash.
Yes.
Is that a bit confronting?
It is. It's something that's difficult. Luckily, I have written my fair share of work reports for child safety, so I am used to being edited. But it is tough. You've got these words that you're just completely in love with. It's like you've had this beautiful baby and someone's kind of drawn on it with a Sharpie. That's what it feels like, honestly. But, I think I've got lovely editors at UQP, and everyone's really working to the common goal of making the book as best as it possibly can be. So I think sometimes you just have to step back and think it through and take some time. And
absolutely.
Yes, yeah. And generally your editor's normally right. So
that's defer to the experts.
Yes, that's right.
They're paid to do this job. They've done it for a long time.
They have.
Yeah. What are the plans from here? I mean, it's probably a little bit hard to look too far into the future. This one's just come out.
But I was lucky enough to get a 2-book deal with UQP.
Great.
So
well done.
Yeah, so in Crow's Nest we went north of Toowoomba, and for the second book we're going to be going south of Toowoomba to Killarney.
2 of my favourite towns.
Yes.
It's not going to be another murder, is it?
Well, it is the Dana Gibson murder mystery series.
Yes,
so yes,
of course, absolutely, definitely.
So it's 2 seemingly unconnected events, a hit and run and a missing teenage boy, which occur in Killarney over a few days.
Right, okay.
Yes.
But they may be linked more than...
Possibly.
I'm not
saying, but
you can't
possibly.
give away too much. Have you already written the Killarney book?
I have done the first draft.
Well, congratulations on the books. I wish you the best of luck with it.
Thank you so much, David, and thanks for having me. It's been so lovely to be here.